So it's definitely super terrifying. I feel you.
Just don't have mushroom for it. You
don't know. That's good. You don't have mushroom game?
I don't have mushroom for it. I'm not a very fun guy. Hi, I'm Gabe.
And I'm Kat.
And we're
the Ghouls next door. Doing normal stuff, being totally normal times.
Totally normal.
This is a Wednesday, Tuesday, about, whatever.
Doing regular human stuff.
Yeah, you know how humans are. We just be doing this.
Yeah.
There's nothing upsetting happening at all. It's just normal.
Our planet is not in danger always.
No. At all.
We will not be the victims of it struggling to survive without us.
No.
I hope you all missed us. We certainly missed you.
We did miss you.
For people listening, we are the Ghouls Next Door, the media and media literacy show that examines the real life, historical and chemical and all kinds of real things, influences on our cinematic or media fears. Yeah. And this first series of 2022 is incredibly timely. Very upsetting. And you're not going to feel good at the end, and I'm sorry.
Sorry, but not sorry. Like, in that, there's some necessary growth that I think will take place. But also, everything sucks. So it's like a little weird mix of the both.
It's kind of inevitable what's going on. It's just a matter of what shape of the apocalypse is going to take. So we are talking about ecological horror, which most of the time is going to be about gross negligence of governing people who mess up. Don't tell people what's going on. And then,
they don't want to cause a national crisis or panic.
No panic.
We can't shut down the economy.
Yeah, no.
Let's get America back to work, Gabe.
Yeah.
Work till die, God. Or just work while you're a literal spore zombie. We're at work right now, but, you see how well our lives are going.
Yeah. But this is that grind culture, Yeah. This is rise and grind, even when, you are a mushroom monster. We are going to be talking about The Last of Us 1 and 2, the video game, because it is terrifying. The second one won a lot of awards and was like Game of the Year or something. It has all kinds of really amazing things because it had great accessibility and all kinds of stuff. But it also just phenomenal representation that's happening in there, messaging, emotions, and also pure terror. It's hard to get that with one piece of media, and they do a good job. So I'm very excited to learn more about it.
I'm going to say so many words, and I'm sorry ahead of time.
No, it's allowed.
I am very excited about these games. 100%. And I think what's interesting about this is I think people initially went into this title thinking oh, no, this is the last, it's the last of The Last of Us. It's the last one. We're done now. The mushroom monsters are going to retire.
Last of Us.
And I don't think that that's what's happening, and I'm pretty excited about that. It went a really interesting direction, and I'm, thrilled.
Well, why don't we jump in? And we are going to start with a little surprise.
Hello. For a second, I was like, what?
What is surprise?
What's the surprise? Was I prepped beforehand? But I am privy to this decision. Gabe and I have switched roles today. So hi. I'm going to do the media analysis time. Hopefully you don't hate it. And you're like, Kat, go back to history. You suck at this. Just kidding. I don't know. No. I think it'll probably be fine. But primarily we have switched because my special interest in hyperfixation is almost always video games. I am a gamer and spend the majority of my spare time doing so, literally almost at the detriment of like all of my responsibilities and relationships. I love gaming so much. And today we'll be talking about The Last of Us, both games, the first and the second, which is known for its very effective display of intense emotion and instilling the in-game player a complex understanding of the human experience. This game does an amazing job of showing the layers of humanity, the ways in which people are complicated. I had played this game when it first came out, and I remember, Gabe, we even did a Twitch stream about it, and it was mostly you'd be like, why do they keep seeing me? Because it's a stealth game, and it's just very hard to do if you don't like to do stealth time.
It's one of the big reasons why you're doing this part and not me.
Yeah. I love stealth. It's actually my favorite game mechanic. So when I saw it was on the PlayStation Now store, the second one, I was like, oh my gosh, this is fate. We can do an episode about both of them because I like had replayed it. And I think when we were discussing Eco Horror, you and I both like made eye contact. We're like, The Last of Us. So this game was amazing in many ways, but it also like really scratched the apocalypse itch and made me realize, honestly, that I probably shouldn't have an apocalypse itch for my gameplay. In hindsight, it's not that fun to be in an actual apocalypse. It's fun like when you're in a game, but it's not. This game does a really great job reminding you that the real apocalypse would probably be a really bad time and you don't actually want to experience it.
Not a good escape when we're in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. And I will say, like, the first game, I remember it hitting really hard, but it was the second game that, like, ruined me, but in, like, a good way. It was so unbelievably emotional and made me feel things that I did not expect to feel, made me feel for characters I didn't expect to sympathize with, and also just, like, shifted who I was rooting for throughout the entire game, which is something that I feel like doesn't always happen. Usually games will set you up with a clear villain, demonize that villain to the point where you're like, all right, I'm cool murdering everything to help my protagonist get through this situation. It flips that on its head and is like, nah, but that's bad probably, and you're going to feel accountable for your actions now. And ow is all I really got to say about that, but it was necessary and really good. For those of you who have never played the title, either title of the game, it's very stressful. The monsters are actually challenging, and the world is realistic in ways that are visceral and very uncomfortable. Both games do horror really well. If you are not a stealth player, though, I warn you that this will probably be a very frustrating game to get through, and we've played it for you, essentially, so you don't have to
watch
if that's
Kat's
not
Twitch
your favorite.
Streams on it.
Yeah, and honestly, after playing it, and it's very long, I want to redo it again, just through like reading about it and talking about it. What makes these games great? They're honest, even when you don't want them to be. There are some people who feel like that's what made it maybe not a great game. I disagree, like, very strongly. The Last of Us really shines as a game, not because it's especially unique in the premise or story, but it's specifically in its approach to gameplay and story development. You're given characters that hurt heroes, who have spent their time in the apocalypse as brutal as anyone else, and characters who have lost most of the people they love and desperately cling to those they have left. Like any apocalypse narrative, the people in the game are scarier than the monsters, although the monsters are still pretty darn scary. The first game, The Last of Us 2013, 20 years after a pandemic has radically changed known civilization, infected humans run wild, and survivors are killing each other for food, weapons, and whatever they can get their hands on. Joel, a violent survivor, is hired to smuggle a 14-year-old girl, Ellie, out of an oppressive military quarantine zone, but as what starts as a small job soon transforms into a brutal journey across the U.S. This is developed by Naughty Dog. The first game lets you start in an unexpected way. You start as Joel's daughter, so before Ellie's even introduced, pre-apocalypse, and you get this background on how Joel ends up the way he does 20 years later. What you learn is that Joel's daughter does not make it on this journey. And the 20 years after that loss has left Joel somewhat numb and callous. Since the story centers on the first 20 years post-apocalypse, the remains of government in society are still pretty prevalently the problem that the in-game character must face, at least at the beginning. There's a government-run soldiers that over-police the remaining population, a guerrilla organization that rises up against them, and the other people who find themselves outside of both spheres desperately trying to like fight each other to survive or just like rebuild wherever they can. The group that they highlight throughout the game that preach the goal of helping rebuild what is classified as a more humane society are called the Fireflies. The method of the Fireflies are like that of any other revolutionary force. The government in this world is familiar, handling the situation horribly, mismanaging supplies, acting brutally and bureaucratically. The first game sets you up with Joel and Tess, who in an attempt to recover guns that are stolen from them, meet up with Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, who asks them to take Ellie, a 14-year-old kid, across town to the members of her group. You get to an introduction to the spore-based monsters and the various stages of their development. And these monsters are both visually and auditorily scary. So, like, even their fear distribution is accessible because there's more than one way in which, like, the characters themselves present as, like, being terrifying. The monsters themselves are pretty unique compared to other zombies, and Gabe will get into whether or not, like, what they're doing and what if they could happen. Why are we scared of mushrooms and spores? There's a good reason, and Gabe will get into that in her section. But spoilers for the first game. We're obviously going to spoil a lot of stuff in this, but if you have not played the first game and you'd like to, go do that now. It is pretty long, but it is very fun. Once you get a bit further into the game, you learn a secret about Ellie, the 14-year-old kid, that they are immune to bites, spores, and monsters. Ellie must get to the Fireflies base across the country to work with doctors on a possible cure. That's like the big reveal of the game, and you really just have to follow Joel and Ellie as they first find out that they don't have to just travel across town, but instead have to travel like from one side of the country to the other. The middle of the game. Oh, yeah. There's an apocalypse. There's spore monsters. There's other survivors who really want to murder them. Or are just like really paranoid and like reasonably so, or just like having a hard time surviving. I'm going to like kind of go quickly through the first game because I really want to talk about the second game more, but the middle of the game is essentially filled with Joel and Ellie bonding through a father-daughter like kinship in an effort, as I said, I'm going to rush through, but there are many impactful emotional scenes that happen throughout the game that hit you really hard, I think, especially considering like the pandemic life that we're living right now. Characters that you don't want to see die that do, and brutally so. This game is as brutal as I think the actual apocalypse would be. While it's fun to think of what would happen in some wacky scenario in which society actually collapses, this game is quick to tell you how harsh and unforgiving that world will be. And as you approach the end of The Last of Us 1, Joel faces an ethical dilemma that would make myself and Sheedy from The Good Place's head explode. It's one I think a lot of people would struggle with when given the choice between an uncertain cure in the life of a child who you've begun to love as your own. There is no good answer. The Fireflies doctor informs Joel that to even attempt to find a cure, Ellie will have to die. Why? I don't know. The game tells you that. You just kind of have to... One thing I really like about these games actually is that you don't really get to make some of the choices that are like less appealing. You don't like, you actually have to just live with consequences that you're like living through this narrative storytelling. But the player doesn't really get to deliberate at all. You just have to make that choice. And while it is arguably selfish choice to save Ellie that has like a lot of like societal implications, I get why Joel does this. And the game kind of ends in this kind of middle space between you wondering what happens next, what really happened at the Fireflies base, what really happened leading up to that. And that's something that does get answered in the second game. There are some people who feel like maybe it didn't need to be said, but I disagree. I think this game was amazing and definitely needed to be said. And so to give you a little synopsis of The Last of Us Part 2, 5 years after the dangerous journey across the post-pandemic United States, Ellie and Joel have settled down in Jackson, Wyoming. Living amongst a thriving community of survivors has allowed them peace and stability, despite the constant threat of an infected or the other desperate survivors. When a violent event disrupts the peace, Ellie embarks on a relentless journey to carry out justice and find closure. As she hunts those responsible down one by one, she is confronted with the devastating physical and emotional repercussions of her actions. And boy, does she. The second game is what I'm really excited to talk about. Being 5 years after the Firefly incident, you see Ellie coming into early adulthood. She's 19 in this version of this game, in a stable environment despite growing up in the literal apocalypse. In Jackson, they have security, electricity, somewhat normal home living arrangements, kids and playgrounds, and nice times behind giant gates. The adults who live in the town go on patrols for supplies and remove infected that stalk the areas outside. Joel and Ellie have some kind of falling out that you explore throughout the entire game that ties back to the ending of the first game. They have built somewhat of a normal life here, though, and while many of the population is still very traumatized by the world outside and the things that they've had to do to create this space, there's something kind of beautiful about this little haven they've created. The second game really does an amazing job showcasing the impact of this trauma that the characters are dealing with, and how mental health in the apocalypse is really complicated. Because even with the veiled comfort of suburbia in this rebuilt society, there is no real safety in this world, in this apocalypse. And there's like this veil that Ellie is kind of having, like, wow, they're having a nice upbringing post that incident. Like, they have made friends, they have learned things in like a safe space to like kind of heal. And then that veil is like ripped away by what happens.
It's kind of like Walking Dead. They always do that.
Yeah.
Once they settle, it's like, oh, now you're dead.
Yeah, now everyone you love is gone.
Yeah.
And you're reminded that the world sucks. The big theme for the second game is vengeance. There is this cycle of pain that had me feeling Naruto Shippuden, pain arc vibe, level sadness. Except Ellie is not Naruto. That's something that we will learn. Have you seen it, you know.
Not knuckleheaded ninja.
Yeah, there are so many threads that are happening all at once, so bear with me as I try to express everything. Like, so much happens in this game. It is so long. It's really hard to, like, tie all the threads together. So for me, the second game hurt. Like, in a way where you're glad you played it, but also really sad for a while afterwards. I think it hit a lot of players hard for that reason, both because it's so long, and then content featured is arguably could have been spread across 2 games instead of 1. It's all crammed in there. So there's so much ouch all in one space that just feels like it goes on forever, which I guess honestly is a nice metaphor for how the actual apocalypse would be. You don't get to turn it off actually in those, like, it just keeps going. So it really leaves you feeling emotionally tired and regular tired once you finally get to the ending. The biggest thing that really shocked me about the way that the story took the game, though, is that by the end, I was really irked by Ellie, like, with her insistence on continuing to pursue vengeance when love and support were waving their arms dramatically in front of her, begging her to stay. It's also one of those things I actually really appreciated about the game, though, because it was honest. And it created, like, this feeling of, like, understanding that people are that frustratingly stubborn. That was a human response to the situation. And as the story forces you to kind of just continue to go, when honestly, there are many times where I was like, why can't she just stay and be happy? Why? She has people who love her. And then it's like, but when you've experienced, like, you don't see that. It feels inauthentic. So it was just very honest. It was very real. And when it really showcased the way that processing loss and seeking revenge, like, what would happen and what does happen when those things take place.
The tunnel vision.
Yeah. And this was not lost on me, albeit very draining. Spoilers for the second game. So why does Ellie want to revenge murder so bad? The second title, Joel is brutally killed by a newly introduced character, Abby, and supported by a group of characters that we later learn are former Fireflies. after watching a video from the creators of the game, I think they achieved what they were trying to do with this. They set out to create a game about the cycle of violence and the consequences that the choice to pursue and continue that cycle has on the in-game characters that are both good and bad. It holds you accountable in ways that I have not seen a game do ever. There's a cyclical sacrifice that takes place throughout that if you're coming from the first title may be really hard to swallow. Many players who plan to come to this second title looking for a story centered on Ellie and Joel growing together through the apocalypse, kind of just an extension of the first game. It does not do that. Joel is murdered very early, and while there are many critiques of this choice, and by specifically the level of exposition that takes place, this game forces you to follow Abby, the child of the doctor that Joel murders to save Ellie from the Fireflies, for like half of the game. I feel these critiques because a lot of them are valid, but the gameplay was a lot. And I felt that frustration as well, where at the beginning of that story development, I kept waiting anxiously to get back to Ellie. I felt myself getting really conflicted with my in-game choices, not wanting to sympathize with Joel's murderer because that made the first half of the game where I'm tasked with revenge murdering a lot of people feel significantly heavier than a fake world video game time has ever forced me to feel. And although that was a lot, I thought it was a really brave choice for them to make. And I think it's something that we needed because it's way easier to commit atrocities when you dehumanize the enemy. That's why our country is the way that it is. So for a game to challenge that and force the player into feeling this level of uncomfortability as well as accountability was just really cool as an idea for me. The critiques of this game also highlight the lack of subtlety the game has, the lack of nuance. So it's kind of like No Nuance November, but the whole time. And the shift from the character development to theme pushing. And I get those critiques, but I also really enjoyed the characters that direction allowed us to meet. I think this was maybe the game a lot of people didn't want to receive, but it was the game that they needed to receive. And it was an experience that kind of forced an empathy shift that is heavily applicable to real life. I welcome the nod back to the fact that Joel and Ellie were never supposed to be heroes. They needed those consequences. They did lots of effed up things throughout their entire journny that, like, in any other scenario would have real and lasting consequences.
And selfish things.
Yeah, like very selfish things that it's like that thing where it's like, if you're gonna kill somebody, you gotta kill the whole thing. Because otherwise they're going to come for you. And wow, that is messed up. So it's like, honestly, like they did not deserve a happy ending.
Yeah.
Any more or less than any of the other characters who are introduced in this game. Like, if anything, Ellie is a villain by the end of this. Or at least you understand why they don't get to be happy. So, it really shows us why the apocalypse is only fun in theory and why the reality of what would actually happen is much more brutal than anyone would actually want to experience in real life. This game does amazing things for accessibility. Specifically, the game had over 60 accessibility features, which are featured on the Naughty Dog website. The website even has a configuration of these presets based on need. In hindsight, I realized I used all the hearing accessibility presets.
Nice.
Because of how my brain processes sound on a sensory level usually makes it very challenging to play sounds. And it also impacts like my ability to process what's visually happening and like auditorily happening. So the game, you can like add arrows to point like where the monster sounds are coming from, and like vibration cues for when certain actions need to take place, and as well as like the size and level of detail that your subtitles contain. So that was just really cool. There was also vision and motor accessibility presets and extensive variations in control options to customize the experience to fit the needs of the player. Considering how amazing this game is with representation, storytelling, etc., it's not surprising to me that they would also take the time to make the game as accessible to as many like differently abled players as possible. To get a full rundown of all the accessibility features, I recommend checking out Naughty Dog's website, which we can include in the description of the video. Representation was something The Last of Us 2 also did really well. This game did something pretty amazing with representation, specifically as expected, because of that, Naughty Dog has received a decent amount of hate for its positive portrayal of women, lesbian, bi, trans, and BIPOC characters, especially for integrating those characters so heavily into the world and story, creating complex, emotional, human characters instead of just like caricatures and fodder. In an article from VentureBeat titled "Why the Story of The Last of Us Part 2 is Maddening and Fulfilling," spoilers, by Dean Takahashi, the creators claim this as a badge of honor. What's happening is what we wanted. People are having conversations, said Haley Gross, narrative lead at Naughty Dog. In her interview with GameBeat, this is an inciting debate about good and evil. It's how far games can get pushed narratively about what makes a redemptive person and what makes a redemptive story. As long as people are asking those questions, I feel like we've accomplished what we have wanted to accomplish. This game does an amazing job where lots of like dystopian and fantasy novels fail, specifically that it actually just like heavily integrates the fact that non-white people exist, non-heteronormative people exist. They exist in the apocalypse too. And it's just like really, really cool. As a pan-Jewish gender fluid human, I love the representation in this game. I felt seen in a lot of the characters, including Dina, who is Ellie's love interest, Lev, the trans character, and Ellie, for real, honestly. These characters were amazing, and their capacity to be both good, evil, cruel, compassionate was so realistic that while I was exhausted by the end of the game, I was also thrilled that the game did what it did. I felt like frustration initially with how long I had to walk in Abby's shoes. Since the beginning, I didn't really care for her, but my feelings around Abby's character transformed exponentially as I went. I was so excited for the introduction of Lev, a trans boy dealing with so much in addition to the whole apocalypse. While the line of the story made the game significantly longer and is where many pointed the bulk of their critique, it was one of my favorite parts of the game. Could they have made that a whole separate game? Probably, but that's what honestly has me hoping for the future, a sequel that unpacks that part of the world further. So for those who've played it or those who haven't, there is a cult that develops in the game where their character of Lev and Yara, they're from the Sephites. I think I said it right. Seraphites. And the other organization that Abby, the main antagonist, is from is called the WLF, and they fight because one group is like kind of free of infected, has this like cult following. They kind of go backwards in time in terms of like technology that they're allowed to use. And that is where Lev and Yara are from. But it was really interesting, and I would love to have like a third game which focuses more heavily on Lev and Yara's backstory and this really interesting cult-like community that develops on this island free of infected. There's also like people who said that like Joel and Ellie's relationship felt more meaningful than the development of Lev and Abby, which I would completely disagree. There was so much left of me like feeling so strongly emotionally, but also like wondering what would happen to Abby and Lev after Ellie leaves them on the beach at the end. And I thought it was so cool, and I am so ready for another sequel where it's just Lev and Abby taking on the world together, finding the fireflies, because that's kind of what they were trying to do. Where maybe even because Ellie has murder revenged everyone and is now miserable and sad and has no purpose, can be the cure guy again. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Maybe in the third one, because they realize how fruitless this revenge murder cycle is, maybe they all team up and find a cure. And then we get a background on Lev and Abby, and we get all this like more information for this new story. Because honestly, anyone who says like it's not as meaningful, just maybe this game wasn't meant for them. So there's apparently a plot pitch for The Last of Us 3, which is confirmed by a Game Rant article that I am here for and ready to give my money. I think they achieved something here that surprised everyone and did so in a way that was raw and painful and necessary for people who usually don't see themselves in games. So the people who don't get it might need to put on their media analysis glasses and recognize that maybe they weren't the target audience for this game.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Yeah. You got like 98% of the games. Let somebody else have some time in game now.
Like what? Okay, so there's one that's not for you.
And also the main protagonists were still freaking white ladies. So, like, what do you want?
Yeah. And
so, like, even steps forward, there's still room that needs to happen.
Yeah. I mean, hearing about the fact that you, like, play through 11, what I think is interesting about them having it be a part of the main game and not this, like, side thing is that it's forcing people to have to play it, which I'm sure is what everyone was complaining about, was that they were forced to play this experience. But I think, like, as media creators, that is so bold and necessary to be like, this is an experience that exists and you all have to, you got to do it. Because it's real, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
and, like, that was, like, the whole game, honestly. Like, for me, like, it was so much like, this hurts. And you need to understand that, though. Like, you need to empathize and have, like, emotions. Because, like, yeah, the world is horrible, but you still have to feel things. And we're going to make you feel things again. You might not want to see that people exist in this world, but you have to if you want to play this game.
Yeah.
You don't really get a choice. They did so much across the board. There's, like, so many threads that I, like, forgot this one part. Like, they show the manifestation of, like, PTSD and, like, other, like, mental health things that would obviously take place in an apocalypse scenario where you're murdering so much. Where, like, the character Ellie, like, as they're going through the game, you see even, like, the characters that talk to each other that she's murdering, she'll murder someone and they'll be like, Johnny, no! Like, the other people. So, like, you'll feel the impact of as that's happening. Or, like, as Ellie progresses throughout, like, she gets more brutal as she goes. It goes, like, from, geez, I wish I didn't have to do this, to F you, go just die, gritting teeth, and, like, really, like, murdering, like, extra hard. And, like, it's so as the character goes, like, they transform in, like, such a drastic way that honestly it's like, it seems like that's what Joel was trying to protect her from, but then in dying, like, that's off the table. Like, he didn't want her to seek revenge, but she did. And, like, even Tommy, the brother of Joel, like, the same thing happens to him. He has, like, a happy life in this town, Joel's brother. And, like, as they're going, he's at first like, Ellie, don't do this. I'll do it for you. I'm going to protect you in the name of Joel. And then at the end, he's the one he gets shot by Abby and, like, injured in a way that, like, hurts him, like, long term, where he has trouble walking. And his entire perspective is like, what do you mean you're not going to go revenge murder this lady? I see that you have this wonderful life with a baby and your love of your life here on a farm with goats and happiness. I want you to abandon that because that lady hurt me. And I think it's your responsibility to go murder her, because that's what Joel would have wanted. Where it's like, no, it's not what they would have wanted. You're literally lost your purpose. And, like, even in the cult, there's, like, all this stuff where, like, when they started, there were lots of messaging that have been, like, warped. So it was, like, also a critique on, like, how religion could be warped in, like, an apocalypse scenario to justify, or has been used to justify, like, atrocities throughout human history. Where it's like the teachings of the thing are totally lost to the people who are in charge and who are using that as a means to just, like, brutalize their communities and other people. And justify murdering other people, like, make them nameless, dehumanize them so that it's their survival's more important than yours. But yeah, they do so many amazing things.
And like, and we are more deserving of living. Yeah,
that's not true. Or at least, like, you gotta get it, you know.
Yeah,
it's such a good game.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Like, all the different levels of that, because the apocalypse is so complex, and it's so interesting for a game especially for the second game, to be less about, like, let's go kill the clickers and the monsters that are happening, or, like, even talk about the fact that, like, why we're here and people get sick. Because, like, in zombie, like, that's really, like, happening as well, is, like, there's also the threat of zombies, but the real fear, even in something like The Walking Dead, is, like, the people. Like, you just gotta deal with regular folk who are trying to live and are like really crazy
and, like, could have been happy, like, they rebuilt stuff but then chose revenge instead.
People be like that. Well, with that being said, let me go. It's my turn. I am playing Kat's part, where I'm going to talk about facts, because when Kat pitched The Last of Us, it was clear that we would have to switch roles because I cannot play this game. I cannot stealth. And you could probably find that video when I tried and how frustrated I was. And it was very toxic for anyone who was around me.
I remember you getting so mad.
I was so angry.
I was like, Gabe, people probably don't want to watch you just curse a lot. And I was like, but it's fine. I'm going to let you do it.
I had to start over that one section. Like, I got as far as like, oh, we have to take Ellie across country. And I was like, no.
Like, no, we don't. Like a lot of work.
JK, we don't. I wasn't going to do it. But on top of that is the fact that, like, one of the reasons why I even tried to play the game was that mushrooms and fungi are genuinely terrifying to me. I am very afraid of them. Which is, like, funny, because if you're watching, I have it on my face. So the clickers and, like, the main thing, it's, like, it's so much, like, I can handle zombies. It's, like, corpses, right? Like, it's gross. Yeah. But it's not your, like, a mushroom monster.
Yeah, it's not your makeup right now.
It's not, like, there's some images of clickers that, like, haunt my nightmares forever. There's a part of, like, trypophobia that comes in when it comes to mushrooms, like, and they have, like, their little gills that really get to me. Yeah. But there's so much else, just, like, everything about, like, I think they're beautiful. And I think that, like, parts of them are really fascinating. And I also eat them. Like, I get it. But I am like, we need to respect fungus.
Because it could murder you.
Like, we need to respect it. It's the same way I feel like I don't ride horses because I respect them too much. They are big, powerful beings. And there's no way I'm going to disrespect you and ride on you. That's not how that's working. Anyway.
I can't because I'm allergic. Yes.
I have this. It's stupid. I get it. But like, on this, there's just something in me where I'm just like, no disrespect, sir horse. So I am not a fungiologist or whatever, whatever it would be called. Because I know Kat often will disclaim, we do research, we do what we can, right? We have the internet, so everyone's like a little pocket scientist every now and again. Yeah. But I am terrified of them, and so through that terror have done research, because that's what you do when you're afraid of something. You're like, I need to know more and to solidify that fear, and we're going to have a little bit more of that next week, where Kat's going to go on a journey that I went on.
No, I'm so not excited.
So I have looked into the millions of truly horrifying things that they are capable of doing. So did you know, my dear Ghoul Scouts, that fungi are genetically closer to humans than plants? Genetically, they are like the cousin of humans.
Oh, Lord, right? That's news to me.
When we started becoming people, fungi were there, right? They were one of the first things in there. Breathing, living, you know? And then we're like, it's a plant. It's not a plant. It's live in such a way that plant is not. So some fungi can even move on their own. Okay. So just need you all to be where I am. They are alive and they are real in a way that we wish our houseplants were real. Like, we're like, we would love it if they were like, they could tell us what they're doing. Anyway. In a way that I 100% wish fungi were not alive. I have seen many horror-adjacent content that is related to fungi that have stayed with me for forever in the way that a lot of those things do, just because I'm like, oh, no, we're doing mushrooms? Cool. All right, that's great. Including an episode of Hannibal, and I love Hannibal. It's a beautiful, disgusting masterpiece of a show that is also very traumatizing. And one day we will do Hannibal because it's so beautiful. And there's just things that they do to the human body that, like, you never would think you would say that's beautiful, but it was. Like, there's a point where someone's made into an instrument, and I just can't. It's like,
I don't want to see that.
You have to. You'll be changed, but there's a part of it that has to do with...
Are they alive while it happens?
Mushrooms.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But there is an episode regarding mushrooms, and I was like, yeah. I think there is an episode of Criminal Minds or something like that had mushrooms, or it was like a serial killer as well. It happens. Mushrooms are scary, and the fact that they're so close to humans. And, like, that they can live and flourish in dying places and they thrive despite all else. It could be, you know, inspiring and also really scary, especially when I tell you what the clickers in this apocalypse world are based on and how they're pretty close to real things that happen. And God forbid they ever really happened, we would be done. So in the Last of Us universe, as Kat explained, there's a post-apocalyptic wasteland full of broken people who are trying to survive and are seeking revenge for wrongs that have been done to them and those they love. Cool. But in this apocalypse, like most others, it really questions what it means to be human and how strong our connections are to like societal expectations and duties and blah, blah, blah. And the monsters are kind of like a secondary thing, right? Like zombies are kind of, you forget about them. But I think further than that, in The Last of Us, it offers us a truly horrifying premise that, unlike zombie films, is possible. In the incredibly early days of Ghouls, I think like episode 5 or something, we covered zombies. And we talked about in that episode how there could be zombies. And we discussed certain parasites that could control your mind. And this is pretty much the same thing. Though it's not to the same level as our cinematic monsters, this idea of a parasite taking over as a host for your brain and reducing humans to their basic instincts for survival is really unsettling and is pure horror just in that. But with The Last of Us, it's also based on real parasites, real life things that are controlling their host for their own wants and needs, and now people don't mean anything. The infection in The Last of Us universe is similar to that of a zombie infection, where we're turned into creatures that are driven by instinct, but in a need to spread the infection. It's always important with a parasite. But instead of like a vague what if scenario, this infection is literally based on a real life fungus. The name itself is like, this is real life fungus. So according to the Last of Us wiki page, they say the mutant infection began to spread in the United States in late September 2013. And in just several months, roughly 60% of humanity was either killed or infected by the Cordyceps fungus, referred to as the Cordyceps brain infection. And that the whole thing is like, they called it the Cordyceps brain infection in the game, and there's a Cordyceps fungi in our life that exists. So super spreading infections sound a bit too real right now in the midst of Omicron that is spreading. But I will say the one silver lining to COVID and Omicron is that it is not this fungus. That's it. That's what I got for you. It's not a fungus that takes over your brain and gives you these spores on your face. But I am going to explain the very real Cordyceps fungus and why you should be afraid. But first, let's go through the progression of the game's infection and what that looks like so you can get properly terrified the way that I am. So this infection evolves through 4 stages, each one increasingly more horrifying than the last. So the first one is called runners. They're called runners. And in this step, this stage of the process, the fungus grows while the host is still alive. So this is that, zombie bite guy. He's like, it's nothing. And it takes away any higher brain function, and with it, their humanity. So they become violent and just reactionary. And it causes the infected host to get hyper-aggressive and incapable of reason or rational thought. And runners have terrible eyesight, but they are still like, they can still see, and they still look human and sound human, which is also really terrifying because when you hear them in the game, they sound like people moaning instead of like a monster. So like you have that instinct to be like, I gotta go save that person, but it's not a person. It's a monster. And it really kind of shows, this first step shows like the fitful resistance of the human body, but it's gonna fail. It's for naught. Stage 2 are called stalkers. And as the infection progresses, the infection begins altering their sight, and as a result of progressing fungal growth over their head, and creates a corruption of their visual cortex. So this is where we're starting to get that like classic clicker look on your eyes. This stage takes anywhere from a week to a year depending on just like people, body to body, it's different. We're learning that in our actual pandemic. The stalkers are still vaguely human-like, but are way more routed. This is where you begin to see the growths. And because cordyceps are capable of bioluminescence, some of these stalkers glow, which is fun. A little glow-in-the-dark monster to come get you. Stage 2 is also where they start to use that echolocation. So they leave behind those like human groans for this like odd croaking sound that they're using to locate their prey instead. So they're becoming a little creepier. Then we get to all the worst of the game and why I was like, oh, I got to play this game because I'll cry. And they're called clickers. My nightmares. At this point, the infection will eventually scar the face completely, causing them to lose their sight and resulting in them developing a primitive form of echolocation to compensate. They cannot see. This stage occurs after a year or so, and clickers rely entirely on echolocation since they no longer have eyes. At all, and instead have disgusting and haunting growths where their eyes once were.
Yes.
For babies. Their echolocation comes in the form of unsettling clicking sounds that will haunt your dreams, and that's why they're called clickers. And the infected folks are even less human. Their bodies are like mostly a fungi at that point. Yeah. And then there's a stage 4 that are pretty rare in the game, but do exist, and they're called bloaters. So over a very long time, they will eventually develop hardened fungal plates over most of their body. If the fungus kills the host body will grow stalk-like fungal projections, which release infectious spores. The infection can also be spread through bites from living hosts. Hosts can only be affected when alive, as the fungus is unable to infect dead bodies due to its parasitic nature. It wants you alive so you can spread it, and it could use you as a puppet. So even then it's dead, it can still spread its virus, but if you're alive, it's coming for you. The bloater stage takes like decades. In rumors. It's decades to do. And unlike the clickers and other infected, the bloaters aren't mobile. Or as mobile or sophisticated enough to use their echolocation, but instead they fulfill their need to spread the infection by releasing mycotoxin. So they're just like, there, now you're it. And when I tell you about the real friggin' fungus, that's just a thing that it does. So that little explanation is just to help you sleep tonight. Just think of those and fall fast asleep. But now let's get into the nonfiction, the real life, truly horrifying real fungus that really exists.
Yay!
It's very real. As I mentioned, The Last of Us Cordyceps brain infection is based on the real Cordyceps fungus, and the inspiration from the infected came to the directors Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann after watching a BBC Planet Earth clip. And
I told you it's horror.
You may recall a Ghouls episode in which Kat has said adamantly that any episode about the underwater world that we live in is a horror movie.
It is.
So
Planet Earth is horror. Our planet is scary.
Our planet is scary, and here's the facts. The clip in question features the infection of an ant by this Cordyceps fungus, and I'm not big on science, but I remember learning in school about this fungus, and it's one of the only things I recall from school regarding science, because I was like, that's horrifying. I guess I'll never forget that. And I definitely saw like the similar clips that they were using in the Planet Earth clip. And I was like, yep, that's the thing that's in my nightmares. So in this clip, we hear Sir David Attenborough as he explains the progression and horror of the parasitic infection. So first, the infection occurs. And in a super helpful article on Medium, I found the zombie fungus in The Last of Us is actually real by Katie Wrights, who I'm like 80% sure we've done we've cited Katie Wrights before. But they say a foraging carpenter ant walks through an area of the tropical rainforest floor infested with microscopic spores dropped by a mature fungus, and the spore excretes an enzyme that eats through the ant's exterior shell. And that's gross. And next week when we talk about what's going on there, you're going to be even more afraid. So that's how they get infected. It gets into their shell.
Their spores.
And then once infected, the fungal... Oh, sorry, I did mess up my quotes here. The fungal cells in the ant's head release chemicals that hijack the insect's central nervous system.
That's good.
So it's taking over. And the ant will latch onto a tree or like a stem, and they call it technically the death grip. So after 2 days, the ant leaves its tree colony and climbs down to a spot where humidity and temperature are optimal for fungus growth, because it knows that. And the ant crawls onto a stem or the underside of a leaf and bites into the middle vein so it won't fall, and then it dies. So this fungus that is alive and intelligent hijacks an ant, takes it away from its friends, and then latches onto a leaf so it won't fall when it dies. And then it dies because it's like, I'm done with you. I didn't need you. That's all I needed you to be alive for, is so that you can grab onto this leaf. And in the video, this is where you can see the body of the Cordyceps fungus growing out of its head. And it's like slowly just like this little, and it's this haunting progression of it excreting and growing and like reaching out. And it's so gross. And that is the fungal growth stage, where the fungus eats the ant's internal organs, using its shell as a protective casing. So it's just chilling on this stem, eaten from the inside. And the fungus main stem, the stroma, erupts from the back of the ant's head and grows. And at the peak of infection, about 40 to 50% of the ant's body is made up of fungus on the inside. So if you'll remember from the clickers, they were majority fungus by that part. Because it ate all your parts on the inside. It's so scary because it's like not even, like it's not made up. This is like science.
Yeah, like what if people stepped on it? What would happen?
If this affected people, this is literally what would happen. And so after about 3 weeks of this poor ant being devoured from the inside, it will begin releasing spores from the tip of that little thing that seek to infect other ants and turn them into fungus heads. And the mature fungus releases spores from the stroma, and the spores fall to the ground, creating a 10 square feet killing zone, which will attack new ants. Again, because it's strategic. So it's just like a bomb of, like, let's get all these guys. So at this point in the video, Sir Attenborough lets us know that the infection is strong and can wipe out entire colonies of ants. This is why if an ant is discovered with the infection, they will be cast out. Like, the group is like, nah, you gotta die. Like, you cannot be here, which is what we see. Like, ants are super smart, so they do that. But if they don't get caught and they happen to be nesting up there, you don't see them, and then they're dropping their spores, now the whole colony is dead. And even more excitingly, there are thousands of different types of Cordyceps fungus, and each focus on one species. They adapt so that they could be the most lethal for whichever species they are attacking at one time. It's great. And in an article on Live Science titled "Zombie Fungus Enslaves Only Its Favorite Ant Brains" by Joseph Castro, the helpful and positive writer that they are, say, parasitic fungus known to manipulate the brains of ants doesn't make slave-like zombies out of any old host. Instead, the microorganism is somehow able to recognize the brains of different ant species and releases its mind-controlling chemical cocktail only when it's in a preferred host, new research shows. So it's not just like who we want, whatever. It has a plan. Like, it has a modus operandi. It's like it has a serial killer that knows what it wants. It's so ridiculous. This is a fungi that we're talking about here, right? It has a fun guy, yeah. It's not mindless or purposeless infection that's spread wherever. It's aware of its evolutionary needs, so it strategically chooses which species of ant to infect and when and who. So that's fun, and people are like,
yeah. What if it was like people now, though?
Yeah, right? So in an interview with Game Informer titled "The Inspirations for The Last of Us," creators Straley and Druckmann were inspired not by the gruesome video but rather like just the video, like they'd watched it, they were like, whatever. But it was actually when Sir David Attenborough explains that the more numerous the species, the more likely it is to become infected. So it's like if there's a larger population of whatever this is, like it's definitely getting infected. And so they ask themselves, what if this thing jumped to humans? Yeah, what if? What if?
Oh no, I see what is coming next visually, and I'm upset. Continue.
I'm sorry. The terrifying thing about the cordyceps fungi is how it evolves to best suit each of its specific intended targets, and the different types and the results of the infection can be oddly beautiful. And like they have this, I've seen like this sped up version of like the different cordyceps fungus in these different insects, and that like growing and blooming with like this new live, and others are just horrific. So here's a little bit visual pleasure for anyone who's watching, where you can see how each one looks very different, and they all also serve different purposes. Because there's also one called, if you're listening to this, I want you to look it up. It is for specifically tarantulas, because they're not scary enough just on their own, and it's called the Cordyceps Ignata, and this one sprouts several buds from its victim. And the kicker is that it doesn't aim to spread its own parasite. It actually just kills it. So it just does it for giggles. So it turns a tarantula, again, already terrifying creature, into this thing just for kicks. Not even for, like, it's
spreads.
Cruel. It's so gross and awful. And the way the infection spread was a bit similar to our current COVID situation, in which humans ate things and spread things unknowingly in the game. So there's like a newspaper clipping in The Last of Us that you can find at Joel and Sarah's house. And it says that the infection began spreading after a series of crops became infected in South America. And the Food and Drug Administration's investigation of crops potentially tainted with mold continues across the country, the article reads. Initial lists distributed to vendors nationwide warned against crops imported, but now the scope has extended to include Central America and Mexico. And it's like, it gets everywhere. So it's just like food. Like you wouldn't even know. It's just all of a sudden it was here. And when I was Googling the fungi, I found that many people actually take the cordyceps fungus for medicinal purposes. Like right now, today, they do. Like I saw that's when you look up cordyceps fungus, that's the most thing that you're going to see is like go buy it at Whole Foods. But here's some good news. It is unlikely that we'll see this fungus infection in humans. There are currently no species of cordyceps that target humans or mammals of any kind, and it would probably take a very long time. So it doesn't mean that it couldn't evolve to one day do that. It's just more likely to take thousands of years for that evolution. And if there were a cordyceps fungus-like infection, then after the years, plural, of the pandemic that we've had from a simple respiratory infection, I have very little doubt that we as humans would be able to maintain that spread of an infection like this.
Yeah, I think we would die.
Yeah. We've had years of this. So it's also like, who's to say that one of these medicinal purpose drugs that are made with cordyceps doesn't alter the timeline? The fact that like people are regularly ingesting this, and probably like there's probably people trying to expedite the way that they're making those so that people can get access to them quicker. Like there's all kinds of things that we're probably doing chemically to them for people to ingest them that could jumpstart their evolutionary process in this timeline and speed it up so that it actually happens. So it's not fiction. It's very real.
Ow.
And I'm valid in being terrified of mushrooms, and I want everyone to know.
There's also like a really interesting documentary on Netflix that's just about mushrooms, like about fungi specifically.
I won't.
So it's definitely super terrifying. I feel you.
Just don't have mushroom for it.
You don't know. That's good. You don't have mushroom game?
I don't have mushroom for it. I'm not a very fun guy. Yeah. Well, yeah, people can watch it. I'm not going to do it, although I get it. And this is just step one of many episodes we're going to have in this eco horror world. And it's like, I think a part of this series that's really scary is how real it is. Because it is like it's just like one little evolutionary step away for this to happen, and that sounds like stupid. But then you have that whole world that you like. I have no doubt that it would come down to something like it did in the game, and that someone would make the decisions that they made, right?
Yeah.
Because people be like that. Like it's not fiction in that way. And what we're gonna find in this series, I think, is something we already know, especially since we're in the middle of an entire Panini press, is that the people in charge don't do what they should, or they react too late, and now it's over. Like now, we got.
And a big thing that I think like this game could do really well is play upon the fears that are very valid and exist around the fact that COVID is new. And something the game does pretty well is like show what happens when the fungus gets to exist for a while. That's why they set it 20 years after the pandemic has happened in the game. So like even extending that timeline further would be really interesting and probably scare a lot of people, because that's a big fear that's happening right now. We don't know what will happen 20 years from now to humanity, just from the fact that this illness has evolved where it has and what is happening. And so I think if they're redoing that, there's a lot of different ways that they could take the monsters, that they could take what happens to the remaining population. Does it instead attack the food supply because of the fact that there's not enough humans left?
And adapt.
Yeah, like there's not enough humans left in this world, 60%. So maybe now it starts to impact other animals. You know, there's lots of like possibilities for like the direction that they could take this. Yeah, it would be horrible. Really horrible, because dogs are a pretty big part of The Last of Us 2. They like are a part of like their survival creation. They like train them to help hunt and like stuff like that.
And they're emotional. Like they're to keep us kind of sane too.
For like emotional well-being too. But yeah, there's like some really cool directions I think the game could go in just with that fact alone, and really play upon those fears that already exist. And I'm sure this period of time has been nothing but inspiration sparking for the creators, because they get to see what it would look like for realsies. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The incompetence is not just theoretical anymore. It's on TV. So
yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also interesting because, like, Ellie, if I'm correct, she, like, lived her whole life in this world. Like, she doesn't know pre-Cordyceps fungus world.
Yeah.
So it's like, and now we'll have a whole nother generation of kids people that just, that's not, like, the same thing now. Like, we have a bunch of kids whose entire generation are not going to know a world where COVID wasn't around.
Yeah. No,
it's not going anywhere. Like it's going to be here for forever. So it's just a matter of like, that's like a whole different thing too, is because what does that do to morality when you're in a world that's always fight or flight, constant? You get messed up.
And it's also hard because like all the adults are traumatized. So are they doing a very good job taking care of those kids and making them feel emotionally well? And stuff like that, because it's like that's a big thing in the first half of the second game, is that they've rebuilt society in some way, but like so many of the adults just don't know how to process their emotions because they've experienced such extensive trauma that like this rebuilt world is like a veil. Like it doesn't feel real, and it feels like upsetting even to some of the characters who are like, this isn't honest.
And they don't have like therapists.
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to school.
60% of the population is gone.
Progress technology or like anything because we're set back. We only got 12 people alive. Like, and I guarantee they're not all the scientists and doctors that we needed. Like that's, it's super interesting. And I think out of all the, like zombies are really scary. Not gonna lie. And depending on which ones they are, they could be even more terrifying, right? Like, if they're really fast. Like in Dawn of the Dead when they're like, ah. But this is very scary to me. Especially because it just happens, and then you're just gross. So gross.
Yeah. It's very much like, it's hard to avoid because it's airborne. And that's something that's like very different. It's like once you have it, it's done. It's very much like the movie where the thing is falling towards Earth and everyone's just like, all right, melancholia. Yeah. And they're just like, I guess this is what we're gonna do now. And like it just does like a lot of development too, and like, what do I want to be there for that? There's characters who choose not to be there. And that's even his whole like really stressful and emotional thing. Just because like living in that world is hard. So
yeah, I mean, living in this one's hard, so it is very hard over there. But yes, I hope you all enjoyed our first episode back, 2022. Starting hot. Next week, we're going to be talking about the found footage horror film, The Bay. Tune in for that. It's one of my favorite found footage horror films, and for good reason. And Kat's going to go through a lot of things because it's like this. Based on some very real things. Not just, when like fact and fiction is like a blurred line, and that's what this is. So
I'm like never going to Maryland again. I just want you to know that because of that movie, never in my life will I set foot in Maryland for the rest of existence. Anywhere in the Chesapeake Bay. I know that's still kind of Pennsylvania. No food that comes from the water is going in my mouth ever.
Yeah. No more crabs. Yeah.
Locally sourced? I don't know. I don't think that's an option. It's not safe.
Yeah.
I don't want that in me. So
stay tuned for why Kat is terrified of the Chesapeake Bay and why you should be as well. And why you should be afraid of the government that is poisoning us. And don't get married.
Well, eat your kids, or if you have them, I guess. Are you going to have them in this world? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think. Like, why?
They're still going to happen. They happen every day in my entire Facebook.
That's true. And it's not like you have like ready birth control in the apocalypse. So
I sent you a TikTok that was good for that as well.
All right. Well, bye, everyone.
Bye. Love you.